There are places the light does not reach and sounds that never fade, places where whispers crawl along the walls and shadows breathe softly in the corners. Sometimes you feel something watching before you ever see it, something waiting with patience, older than time. The air turns colder and every heartbeat seems to echo louder than the last. This is not imagination. It is memory of something ancient that remembers you even if you try to forget it. There was a small town forgotten by maps and travelers, hidden behind miles of twisted trees and roads that never seemed to end. Those who stumbled upon it rarely stayed long, because the silence there had weight like the air itself was listening. The buildings leaned in toward the streets as if they were whispering secrets to each other. No one knew who built them or when they had last been alive. The windows were dark and hollow, like eyes that never closed, and the wind carried a sound that was almost a voice. Once there was a family that moved into one of those houses, a tall, narrow home with walls that groaned every night and floors that seemed to breathe. They said it was cheap. They said it just needed love. They laughed when the locals warned them about the house because warnings sound like stories until they become truth. The father worked late and the mother painted by the light of a single candle, while their daughter played upstairs, her laughter filling the halls until the laughter stopped. It began with little things, the sound of footsteps in the attic, the whisper of their names. When no one was near, the daughter said she had a new friend, someone who lived in the walls. The mother smiled at first because children have imaginations, but then one night she woke to the sound of her daughter talking to someone, and another voice answered from the dark. The voice was dry and brittle like paper burning. Slowly it asked if the mother wanted to see its room. She thought she was dreaming until she felt something cold brush against her ankle. She screamed, but when the lights came on, nothing was there. Nothing except the faint outline of handprints in the dust beneath her bed, too small to belong to any adult and too strange to be human. From that night on, the air inside the house never felt warm. The clocks stopped ticking, and mirrors began to cloud, even without steam shadows gathered in corners, even when the lights were bright, and at times it felt like the walls were pulsing like a heartbeat. One evening the father came home and found his reflection smiling back at him. Even though he was not the one smiling, he touched the mirror and felt something on the other side touch him back. The daughter stopped eating, stopped speaking. She would just sit at the foot of her bed, staring into the corner of the room, whispering to whatever waited there. Sometimes she would laugh quietly and sometimes she would cry, but she never looked away. The mother called for help, but no one came because the phone lines in that town had not worked for years. Though she swore she had spoken to someone the night before, the house was changing. Growing colder, the wallpaper began to peel, revealing words scratched into the plaster behind it. They were not words she recognized, but they pulsed with a strange rhythm like breathing. She heard faint knocking beneath the floor and sometimes voices humming just below hearing. At night she dreamed of narrow hallways that twisted forever and a door at the end that opened inward to darkness when she woke. Her hands were covered in dust and her feet were cold as if she had been walking for hours. The father started leaving the house before dawn, and returning after midnight he said he had work, but his clothes smelled like earth and his eyes looked hollow one night. He did not come home the next morning. The mother found footprints leading out to the woods behind the house, and she followed them. Though the trees whispered her name, the deeper she went, the quieter the world became until all she could hear was her own breath. Then she saw him standing by an old well. His back turned when she called his name. He turned, but his face was wrong. His eyes were too dark, and his smile too wide. He whispered something that made her knees tremble, and she ran back to the house. But the door was already open, and her daughter was gone. All that remained was a trail of small handprints leading to the basement. She hesitated at the top of the stairs. The smell of damp earth and something metallic filled the air. She could hear breathing below. Not hers. Not human. When she finally descended, she found the walls wet and glistening, like they were alive. Her daughter stood in the center of the room, pale and silent, her eyes completely black. She whispered one word, "Mother," but the voice that came out was not hers. It was older, deeper. The shadows behind her began to move, stretching across the floor, reaching for the light. She tried to grab her daughter, but the ground gave way beneath her feet, and she fell into the dark. When she opened her eyes, she was in another room, one that looked exactly like her own. But wrong. The walls were too close, the ceiling too low. She could hear the sound of laughter coming from the floorboards above. She called out, but no one answered. She walked toward the window, but instead of seeing trees, she saw faces pressed against the glass. Hundreds of them all smiling. The air smelled of rot and the sound of flies filled her ears. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Upstairs in the real house, or what was left of it, the father returned to find silence. He searched every room. Until he reached the basement door, it was closed, but something behind it was whispering his name. He opened it and saw the same stairs leading down, but the darkness was thick, like liquid. He took one step, then another, and the door closed behind him. No one ever saw him again. Years later, when people passed through that forgotten town, they would see lights flicker in that house at night. Sometimes they swore they could hear a child's laughter, or the sound of someone breathing behind the windows. A few brave souls entered and came running out pale as ash. They said the walls moved. They said the house was hungry. Those who stayed long enough claimed the house remembered every voice, every footstep, every drop of fear that entered it. The walls would whisper your name until you answered, and once you answered it, would never let you go. There are still nights. When travelers hear the faint sound of a girl singing somewhere beyond the trees, they say if you follow the sound long enough, you will find the old house waiting and the door will always be open. Some people say the house was built on cursed land. Others say it was born from grief itself, a place where sorrow took shape and learned to breathe. But those who have seen it know the truth. It is not the house that haunts the people. It is the people who haunt the house. Every whisper, every scream, every memory becomes part of its endless hunger. And if you ever find yourself walking down a road that seems to stretch too far, if you see a light flicker where no light should be, and feel the air grow, still turn back. Because once you step inside that place, once you hear your name spoken from the dark, there is no leaving, no waking, no end. The house does not want guests. It wants you, and somewhere deep in the silence behind the walls, something begins to whisper again.